to say 2016?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Perfect. If you see anything else, feel free to jump up here and fix it. Awesome.
So you want to sit at the table now, Bill? Or?
No, no, just here, anywhere, in fact,
Okay.
front's fine.
All righty.
Yes. I was watching Zinke at his presentation on Heritage, streaming live.
Oh.
About his new book.
Oh.
sure there's room in here for me.
Hey,
William, how are you doing?
Good.
Good to see you.
How are you doing?
Great.
Good. You're looking dapper today.
Thanks for the invite. I sure appreciate it.
Sure.
We just so glad to have you.
Right on there.
All righty. Also,
It's Friday.
there's a beautiful print, and it's the newsboy from downtown that Becky Iker did, the little newsboy.
Yeah?
And then Bob Morgan did a print of it.
Right.
If you give $100, you get that as a little bonus. And I'd already given last spring. I just wanted, I know that's just what my father looked like selling
Oh, wow.
papers in Butte, Montana when he was little.
$100 to,
Montana Historical Society.
oh, well, I'm going to need to check into that.
Yeah,
We've got a statuette in our office, but we don't have we
the
don't have
print
prints.
is beautiful.
Yeah, I'll have to take a look at
Yeah,
that.
when you come out like this, if you go right, it's gonna be Bruce's office. Well, the first office right here, they've got them in their souvenirs
Oh, okay.
selling.
Nice.
And I think, my God, we got new people here that could do something with them.
Morning.
Hi, I'm John Balder.
Hi, Jim Rickman with the Newspaper Association.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Did you drive over today?
Yeah.
Yesterday?
Yeah, last night I didn't want to chance it.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
Figured out better.
Take that variable out of the whole
Yes.
situation, right? Why
Yeah.
why have to mess around with that?
How was your drive?
Pretty good. All about a mile and a half.
Oh, okay.
Our office is in town here, so
Okay.
this is a nice place for me to go to a meeting.
Oh,
It's close. Where's your office? In the Great Northern one, town center.
Right.
That's a nice development.
It's real nice. Yeah, we're real fortunate to have a spot down there. The executive director at the time that complex was being built had the foresight to get in on the ground floor, and we bought property, so it's nice to have office space.
Oh, yeah. Golly. That is nice. Nice little investment for you guys.
Yeah, it was.
Good.
Howdy, my name's Jim Rickman.
Hi, Jim. I'm Judy Rolfe.
Yes.
And I am with Congressman Zinke's office.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Nice to see you on this.
Nice to see you. Yeah, it is it is a little brisk out
Oh
there.
my gosh, yeah. These kind of meetings are for the hardy.
I agree.
Hi. Hi there. I'm John Baldridge.
Hi, John. Judy Rolfe
Very
with
nice to meet you.
Congressman Zinke's office.
Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I work
Yes.
at the Bureau of Business and Economic Research.
Oh, good. Okay.
So
All right.
I'll be talking a little bit.
Good. Was it Mr. Markey that was, I listened to him on Monday, Tuesday. Tuesday.
He's my boss.
Okay, he spoke at the Montana Taxpayers Association meeting. And you guys just really, you give us good valuable information.
We try to do
Oh my gosh, yeah, oh yeah. There's so much of it.
Well, even this talk is going to raise the question about the credibility of some information compared to others.
You know, we're saturated with information. There's a lot going on. first aid staff.
Oh, yeah, no, I think mine is very interesting.
And then when we break some sentences.
And then I will, our
we set
communications
it can
director,
be over in general areas so that you can
DC officer
see
named Heather
that
Swift,
camera.
and she wanted.
Okay.
Will-
Because you're actually gonna,
Yeah.
you're using the
You
camera.
know, the main big set of PowerPoints and results or something.
Okay,
She
I'm
might
gonna
be
check
interested
that out.
in. Because we list, down to the little weekly little newspapers and that kind of thing, those that have sites that people talk to us about. So
And that will be on the website?
it will be, it'll be on Greater Montana Foundations and on ours.
Very good. I will have her go there and, yeah.
Cool.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Oh.
But I didn't say it, so.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Right. Hi there.
Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, no, you're fine.
How's the drive over?
The drive wasn't that bad. Actually, there was some ice, but I was pleasantly surprised. It wasn't a foot of snow. Where I'm currently coordinating with some ski buddies to figure out whether or not there's going to be any skiing this weekend. I think we got a lot less than we thought we were.
Yeah. I've made this particular drive, this one I am on the drive a lot, and as long as it's daylight.
How are you, dear?
Yeah, leaving in the dark was a little bit hairy. So once the sun came up,
I like to sit.
Especially on 12, I find.
You're absolutely welcome.
And it's nice.
And you know, eventually, we'll probably turn these chairs around. This is where we'll come back.
Yeah.
And you got lunch, and you have our lunch and
I really
stuff.
don't like it.
And that's where we sit so that,
Because of the.
so that then.
Right.
It's like,
If you
oh,
hit,
making a great guess.
But they were
yeah,
pretty solid.
right. Yeah, there's not a lot of definition in that road. So, yeah, I'm sorry we couldn't coordinate, but I actually got to get another meeting on the way.
No, I didn't.
I
I had no expectation. I just thought I'd communicate.
So did you guys do this, or did you contract it out?
Oh, my Boniface's
Okay,
house.
I mean, you guys have people in house.
Yes.
And they had their engagement party.
Yes.
Yeah,
My
I
son
didn't
and I.
know if the, are you gonna show us the actual, question?
The question language
Oh.
for
They had a lovely day for it.
each of the
My
questions
son
that we're
is
going to
trucks.
show here will be at the top of the slide.
It will, okay, good.
And
then the,
Spencer and trucks.
we've got a couple of other
Yes.
products.
They were all.
We've got top line results that just have the frequencies of
No, as
responses
parents, we kind of got.
printed on the questionnaire.
Oh, that's so nice.
You get the whole questionnaire.
Right.
That's the
Wonderful.
Yeah, I had, some of the
Kids and,
questions, I'm sure they're hard to ask, but I was trying to figure out what people were actually responding to.
Nice to meet you.
Search for news, or does it come from you? I wonder whether people know the difference.
Hi, Mackenzie.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I can't.
I'm, it's freezing.
It's valid point. You have to.
I used to work at the station. Really? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I miss my TV days.
Especially
Yeah.
telephone surveyor search.
Right.
I think that's a pretty valid point. So I think it probably doesn't. I think the general
know what this costs?
Yes. This costs $27,000.
I went underground for about a week. 'Cause I'm
Is
sure
my
they
deputy
got
reader right here? Sure.
It just came out yesterday, and only my Mary pays $80.
You want to take your seats, we're about to get started, and we're live streaming, so we want to start on time.
How's Nancy doing? She doing well? She's doing great. Good?
I'll get out of the way.
Oh, I know, that's, I was just gonna say that. I keep telling her. So you don't want to forget that. You got to keep, especially this time. Well, they're getting older too, they're getting kind of forgetful. Yeah.
He's just not himself anymore.
Can you grab me? Sure. Yes. Cream, sugar, anything, honey? Just black. Okay.
Oh, of course not, yes.
Close to the action. Yes, that's good.
You guys home? Were you home for Christmas then? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I went to Boise for Thanksgiving. Who did you?
That was your traveling. You got your traveling out of the way. Folks, this is about a 2-minute warning. We're live streaming and recording, and so we'll go in just 2 minutes. Again, that clock is off by 3, so.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our event today at the Montana Historical Society in the Craney Studio, where we're going to be talking about a very important research project that the Greater Montana Foundation, in partnership with the Bureau of Business and Economic Research at the University of Montana, has just completed on Montanans' internet news sources and use. And I think you'll find this absolutely fascinating. As chairman of the Greater Montana Foundation, I want to not only welcome you, but I want to thank some people right now. First of all, Bruce Wittenberg and the team here at the Historical Society have done a great job in hosting us today. And I want to thank also our executive director of the Greater Montana Foundation, Sid Armstrong, who keeps us running and keeps us focused on all the right things. We also have a number of our trustees here and that will be with us for the remainder of the program and the discussion. I want to welcome Jim Senst, Fred Flanders, and also Leo Berry. And also would like to mention that we are in a venue that we're very pleased to have funded for the Montana Historical Society. And unfortunately, the folks who are watching on live stream or on the archived version are not going to be able to fully see some of the artwork in this room. But this is the Craney Studio that's named for our founder, and I'll have more to say about him in just a moment, Ed Craney. And the artwork here was donated also by the Greater Montana Foundation, and it was part of Ed's extensive art collection. So we want to encourage those who are here to take a look at the artwork and, of course, welcome you to this venue. Let me just say a couple of words about the Greater Montana Foundation. As many of you know, our mission is really to encourage communication on issues of importance to present and future generations of Montanans. And we do that in a variety of means that I'll explain in just a moment. But first, the foundation was really endowed and created by Ed Craney in 1958, and it has operated since to fulfill the mission that I just described. We do it by a number of grants of various categories. They are awarded competitively and to a variety of recipients. We also do scholarships and we do educational assistance grants for both working journalists and for journalism students to improve their capability in areas such as, most recently, reporting on jobs and the economy that is the top issue of importance to Montanans. And then we have a number of special projects that we are always working on, and we encourage anyone who has an idea for a potential grant to contact Sid Armstrong or contact me or any of the trustees of the foundation, and we'd love to bounce ideas with you anytime. A number of examples of the grants that we have given are shown on the slide here. One of the most recent and one of the most interesting was a grant to KRTV and MTN for a trip to Romania with the Montana National Guard to report on how the Montana Guard is actually helping to reinforce and assure allies during a pretty troubling time in terms of geopolitical dynamics. And you know a number of the other programs and areas that we have provided grants to as well. The goal of the Greater Montana Foundation in doing the research that you're going to see more about here in just a few minutes really was twofold. One is to help better inform our grant-making processes and programs, but also to help media and other stakeholders, whether business or political or government or nonprofit organizations, these stakeholders better understand the changing dynamics in the ways that Montanans receive information. And of course, today we're focusing on internet methods. And some of our conclusions and implications that I would just ask you to kind of be on the lookout for are shown here. The use of the internet is pervasive in Montana. It is growing in Montana. But Montana media outlets, whether print, broadcast, or others, are adapting and evolving to keep pace with this new technology that Montanans are increasingly using. Also, social media does play a role that you'll see more on in just a few minutes. But that raises not only some gratifying benefits to highlight, it also does raise a couple of concerns that we're going to talk about both in the formal presentation and then in the discussion session that follows over lunch a little bit later. So without any more preliminaries, let me invite John Baldridge, who is the Director of Survey Research at the Bureau of Business and Economic Research of the University of Montana, to come up and give us a presentation of what you and the team discovered. John.
Bill, thank you very much. Foundation members, board members, thank you very much. Members of the press that are here and other interested folks, thank you very much for taking time on this
snowy and challenging day to come hear a little bit about what I think you'll find are really pretty interesting survey research results. I am John Baldridge. I work at University of Montana's Bureau of Business and Economic Research. I'm a survey researcher. That's the good news. The bad news is that I'm not a journalist and I'm not an expert on the internet. So what I'm going to do in the next 20 minutes or so are describe some survey results and try not to make too many broad, sweeping conclusions about them in terms of their implications for the field of journalism or society in general. I'm a data gatherer, and hopefully you all can help us draw some of those conclusions. Bill talked about the purpose of this particular survey, and I've got a slide here that describes it. I'll hold it up there for just a minute, but Bill did a really pretty good job of describing the purpose. I don't think I need to beat that into the ground too much. I am a survey researcher, and as such, I do want to talk about methods a little bit. This thing was administered in September, from September 6th through September 29th of 2016, by our interviewers in Missoula at the Bureau of Business and Economic Research. The main point of this slide is that for all of the respondents, we've got a sampling error rate of 4.1 percentage points, and for most of the survey, our sampling error rate is 4.4%, because most of the survey looks at folks who use the internet. This is a telephone survey. It's a random survey. And if anybody would like a copy of the questionnaire, please see me, and I would be really happy to give you the question wording. All right. This slide summarizes 4 key takeaways. Bill touched on them, but I'd like one more time to go over them with you. First, Montana television stations, radio stations, and newspaper websites are heavily used internet sources among Montanans. Next, with regard to local news and with regard to state of Montana news, Montana's television, radio, and newspapers, their websites are the dominant sources of local news and state news. Next, and this is something that most people are aware of, but it's really important to reinforce, 3/4 of folks who get their news on the internet get it on their smartphone. That isn't the only place they get their news on the internet, but 3/4 of them get news from their smartphone. And finally, we did examine the possibility that this sort of information echo chamber effect might be happening in Montana. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we've heard a lot in the press and elsewhere about people who trade, say, only share news stories on the internet, either with social media or by email, with people that they know. Or we've heard a lot about people choosing only to go to news websites that are pretty congruent with their beliefs. And as such, there's a fear out there that people might be reinforcing their own beliefs and attitudes and not exposed to a broader range of beliefs and attitudes. We wanted to see if there's any evidence at all among Montana adults that that's happening, and we found a little bit. All right, let me put this study into context for you. In June of 2015, we did another survey for the Greater Montana Foundation that looked at Montanans and how they get news from all sources. And let me reinforce the fact that Montanans get news from newspapers. They get news from the radio by listening to the radio. They get it from the television. But they also do get it on the internet. And so for the rest of this talk, we're going to be focusing on Montanans who get their news on the internet. At the beginning of the survey, to calibrate our results and just track issues of interest for Greater Montana Foundation, we asked what issue areas are most important to Montanans. Now, we asked this in June of 2015, and we asked it again in September 2016, and the results really didn't change very much, surprisingly. There was a little bit of movement, not very much that is outside the margin of sampling error. So jobs and the economy, just like in 2015, were the dominant issue that people said was most important to them in Montana. This is just another way to look at it, and this compares the rankings of the issues in June 2015 and September 2016, and there was essentially almost no movement in terms of the relative rankings. All right. Now, to do this survey, we needed to find the folks who use the internet. So we screened people on a couple of questions. First of all, do you use the internet? And second of all, do you access the internet on a cell phone or a tablet or by some other mobile handheld media? We wanted to get 2 no's from people before we screened them out. And so that's why we asked both questions. So the remainder of the study are going to look at the people who said no to both of those questions. They're people who told us twice, no, I don't use the internet. We screened them out, so everybody else who uses the internet is in. Now, we asked them how do they access the internet? The takeaway from this slide is pretty simple. They access it in multiple points. They use smartphones, they use computers, they use laptops, a variety of means. And then this slide is just for the folks who use the internet. We asked them how they got their news on the past week, and we asked them about each one of these sources. Not surprisingly, internet, 70% of Montanans get news on the internet. Got news on the internet in the last week of the ones who use the internet. One of the more interesting findings that we had was we asked people about their intentional seeking news on the internet and then unintentional news seeking, unintentional consumption, bumping into the news. You can see the question language that we used specifically right there on the slide if you want to know specifically how we asked it. But the takeaway here is that over half of folks who use the internet go out and seek news intentionally, and about 3/4 of people who use the internet are on the internet for other reasons, surfing around and bump into news that they then consume. We asked folks where they consume their news when they're getting on the internet. Most of them do it at home, but a lot of them do it at work or on the go with that handheld or elsewhere. Next, we were pretty interested in the websites that Montanans use to get news. We asked them about several types of website. They're there right here on this axis. We asked them about weather, local news, national news, Montana news, international news, sports, entertainment, ag news, and celebrity. And these bars represent the number of folks, the proportion of folks who said, yes, I look at weather news, or yes, I look at local and community news. So let's dig in a little bit. I'm going to dig in the order of the proportion of folks who said, yes, I consume that kind of news on the internet. So, weather. These are the top websites, right over here on the left, that folks mentioned to us in an open-ended question as being the ones that they go to when they get weather news. Now, we also asked folks over here on the right-hand side which weather news site they thought was most credible. And their responses are over there on the right. There's one thing I do want to point out. Not a lot of folks were really willing to actually name one that was more credible than another one. So I think you want to be fairly careful of this. The number of respondents there, 51, is kind of low. And remember, we were doing this right in the heat of the election season. And if we asked a question that some folks felt a little bit uncomfortable, sometimes they just told us they didn't know, or just said they didn't want to answer, because folks were pretty sensitive in September 2016 when you called them on the phone. Now, of the 26 websites that folks mentioned that they go to for weather, half of them are based here in Montana, and half of them are based out of state. What about local and community news? Well, over on the left, you can see the top websites that folks mentioned statewide of those who use the internet. There are a lot more than this, by the way. But these are the top ones. And then we asked about credibility over on the right-hand side. And I'll let you take a look at that. These are all websites. And here's a slide that backs up one of our key findings, and that is that, as you would expect, really, Montana-based websites dominate as the source of local or community news on the web for Montana adults. What about national news? Well, we got 376 different responses from folks, and the top responses are over there on the left. And then we did get some responses about credibility as well. All right. For national news, websites that originate outside of Montana tend to be used more often than Montana-based websites by Montana adults who use the internet as their source of national news. What about Montana news? Well, over here on the left are the top mentioned websites and the websites that folks were willing to give us a response about in terms of credibility. Again, for Montana news, websites that originate within Montana dominate as the source for adults who use the internet in Montana of Montana news. What about international news? Well, interestingly, there's an international site or two that pop up here. You'll see BBC and the London Daily Mail. I wouldn't lean too hard on that. And not surprisingly, websites that originate from outside Montana are the dominant sources of news for international news. Now, we ask folks, just in general, when you access news on the internet, do you access a newspaper site? And then we ask them, do you access a TV website? And then we ask them, do you access a radio website? And here are the responses that we got. 56% said they access a newspaper website. About 30% said they access a TV website. And about 20% said they access a radio website. We also asked a credibility question here. Of the three, and we named the three, online newspaper, online TV, online radio, which one do you feel is most credible? And those are the percentages of the responses that we got among people who use the internet, adults who use the internet in Montana. It's not just going to websites where people consume news, though they get there eventually. Often their consumption of news is filtered through or is done in conjunction with social media. So we needed to look at that. We asked folks how often in the last week do they access a news item through social media. And 57% access of adults who use the internet access a news item through social media. That's a pretty big number. Now, of those who do so, you can see a fairly significant proportion do it twice a day, 3 times a day or more. Now, I wanted to let you know that the population that we're looking at here has dropped down to only those folks who use social media. Okay? And half of them actually follow a news site on their feed, either Facebook or Twitter, and half don't. And we asked them, what are the 1 or 2 websites that you follow on your Facebook or Twitter feed? And these are the top ones. Oh, let me go back. Right there. Okay. It isn't just social media, but now, especially because of the predominance of smartphones, but not entirely, people access news through apps. So we wanted to examine that in a little more detail. A quarter of adult Montanans who use the internet have an app, a news app. Pretty big number. We asked them, which app do you have? And we took a couple of responses, open-ended from each one. And these are the apps that they named. I wanted to say something about that. We didn't correct errors here. We captured the responses that folks gave us. Sometimes when you ask folks about the internet, they make mistakes. So in general, when you look at these responses, look, the methodology used for this survey was very good. But recognize that we're talking to human beings who sometimes make some boo-boos too. Okay? There's not very many in here, but it's a reflection of folks. And we're sampling actual folks. Okay. Now, among the more interesting things about the internet and getting news on the internet is that it allows people to interact with that news. And so we needed to look at how those folks interact with news. One question we asked is, do you ever write a comment about a news story that you read? And 13% of folks who use the internet say that they do write comments. Just for your information, that's about 11% of all adults in Montana. So those comments that you see, that you read, are coming from a relatively small part of the adult population. Now, we also asked, this is another way that people can interact with news. Have you ever shared a news article, either in an email or on a social media site like Twitter or Facebook? And here, almost half of folks who use the internet have shared a link or a news article with someone else. I'm sure that all the folks who work for news organizations in here already knew that this is a really important part of your market. But this should reinforce that it is a very important part of your market and the distribution of your news. We asked folks 3 different questions about with whom they share news, and here's what we came up with, mostly friends and relatives. We also asked a fairly interesting, I think, open-ended question. We asked, what's the main reason that you share news on the internet? And one of the takeaways from me is relevance and interest. If it's relevant and interesting, you get 30, you get 16, you get 17. We didn't want to lump these too closely together. We didn't want to take out the detail. We wanted to give you at least a look at kind of the richness of the responses here. The more detailed responses are even more interesting. One of the things that I wish we had a lot more completions so that we could look at is to look at the self-identified trolls. I say that half jokingly and then half not, because sometimes that behavior can be sort of pernicious. And the fact that there are people who will self-identify, I think, is fairly interesting. Now, first we asked an open-ended question, and then we asked specifically, do you sometimes share things on the internet to influence people or not? And about 1 in 5 Montanans who use the internet do share things to influence somebody else. Next, we wanted to ask a couple of questions to begin to try to look at that information echo chamber, news echo chamber effect that I talked about at the beginning. So one of the wording that we asked for this question is right up here. And this asks, when the respondent, the person we were talking to on the phone, shares something, do they share it with people they agree with or not? And yeah, they share it with people they agree with. And again, this is of everybody who uses the internet, which is why we've got this over here. The folks who don't share are taken out. So they either share things with people they agree with or they don't know. So we asked the converse of that. When you receive something, is it from somebody you agree with or not? And we got really similar result. But a little more skepticism about the not sure, because it's coming from outside. That sort of makes sense. So speaking of skepticism, the next thing that we asked, and it's pretty important, is just in general, when you read a news item that somebody has shared with you, rate the credibility of those items for us, would you please? And most folks said that it was somewhat credible. So that, that result there shows a healthy amount of skepticism, I think, in general, from folks about things that are being shared with them. That might be a good news takeaway. So we asked a couple of those questions, and I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into this information echo chamber question. And when you do stuff with survey research and in the social sciences, you need to recognize that you're dealing with humans, and humans are not Hewlett-Packards the way they think. They're humans. And so you don't want to lean on just the answers to one question in a survey. My mentor, Dr. Norman Bradburn, who was provost of University of Chicago, always taught me to stand on at least 2 legs with survey research. So, to pull out one dimension of this potential information echo chamber phenomenon, the dimension that looks at people sharing information with each other, I wanted to pull out the folks who said that they share stuff with people they agree with, and they don't share news with the public. I wanted them to tell me twice. Likewise, I pulled out the people who said most of the stuff they receive comes from people that agree with them, and they don't share news on the internet with the public. So I wanted people to tell me twice before I pulled them out and looked at them more carefully. so that I could have a little bit more confidence that these might be the people of interest, people who, for this study, people who exchange news on the internet mostly with like-minded people. Okay? Well, over a third of Montanans exchange news on the internet with mostly like-minded people. Does that mean that these people live in an echo chamber? No, certainly not. But it gives me somebody to look at, to examine, to learn a little more about whether this phenomenon actually exists. Does this mean that the people in this 63.7% don't live in an information echo chamber? No, because there's another dimension. This is the sharing behavior. That's one dimension. But people can choose just to go to a website or not without doing any sharing. So that's another dimension that we'll look at in a minute. So next we asked people, I wanted to look at people's answer to the credibility question, whether or not they shared news with mostly like-minded people. So this right here over on the left is the ratings of the credibility of a news item that someone else has shared with people who mostly exchange news with like-minded folks. I probably butchered the description of that a little bit. I'll go back. We looked at the credibility answers of these people, the ones who exchange news mostly with like-minded people. This over here are their responses. And you'll notice it was different than the overall population. The number of folks who think the news item that is exchanged is credible is quite a bit higher. Okay? This is sort of natural. They're exchanging news items with like-minded people, often friends and relatives, like we found before. We can compare their answers to the people who don't exchange news mostly with like-minded folks. And here you can see that there's more skepticism. So, this raises the possibility that there's a risk that people are improperly trusting at least some of the items that they're receiving from like-minded folks. But we don't know that to be true. It raises a little question, and that's all. But it's something that's important to talk about. Now, what are the demographics of the folks, the Montanans, who share news mostly with like-minded people? Well, in terms of education, 50% of people with bachelor's degrees fall into that category of sharing news with like-minded people. That was a real head-scratcher for me. High school grad or less, 36% of the high school grads, people with a high school graduation level of education attainment or less, exchange news with like-minded people. We also looked at their political party affiliation over here on the right. And half of Republicans, people who self-identify as Republicans, share news with like-minded people. and just over a third of independents, libertarians, and others. So I said that was one dimension, the sharing dimension that we could look at to see if there's any maybe information echo chamber effect. Another dimension is simply where people go seek and consume news from a website. All right? There's no sharing really between people. It's just one person going to get news. So we could look at, and one might think that in that dimension, being, you might find that information echo chamber effect if a person goes to seek news from a source that is generally known to be in agreement with them. So let's take a look and see if we could see anything like that. For national news, here are the websites that people most often go to for news, for national news, if they self-identify as Republicans. And these websites on the right are the websites that Democrats, self-identified Democrats, go to when they consume national news. And international news. Over here on the left are the websites that Republicans go to for international news, and on the right are the websites that Democrats go to. So, along the two dimensions, all this survey does is hint that, yeah, that information echo chamber effect might really be going on among adults in Montana, but we don't know that for sure. Okay? This gives us some hints that it does. And it raises maybe more questions than it answers, but it's certainly, and the Greater Montana Foundation, to their credit, needs to get credit for this. It gives us more information than we had before about whether this happens or not among adults in Montana. It certainly gives us more information than we had before. And so thank you to the foundation for doing this study and for giving us, making us scratch our head and say, why is it that more educated people are more likely to share things mostly with like-minded people? Why is that? That gives us something to really kind of dig in and study in the future. So thank you very much, all, and I'd be happy to open for questions.
I have one. So there was really no study done on people that put an article on their Facebook and then they're befriended. Do you think that happens a lot in Montana? I think it does. I think that people take so much of a certain person with whatever news they're broadcasting, whether it be, political or whatever, and then they get tired of it, so they befriend the person.
Yeah, I just didn't study that, so I'm afraid I don't know is the answer I have to give you. But it certainly sounds plausible. Eric?
Do you have any more demographic information other than adults above age 18? Do you have like an age breakdown? And then I have a question about that. If you could explain what you mean by weighting, how it's weighted for gender, age, and location for U.S. Census Bureau.
the first question was, do we have any more demographics? The answer is yes, we've got a ton. The Greater Montana Foundation and the Bureau of Business and Economic Research have a slide deck of in excess of 120 slides, which have that demographic information. We're happy to provide those.
For this particular survey?
For this particular survey. And then, yes, these data are weighted by location, age, and sex.
Let me also add that on the question of the broader data set, we will have that posted both on the BBER website and on the Greater Montana website, we are hoping by Monday.
Yes?
How about frequency or time on site? Were those questions asked at all?
No.
Okay.
Not other than what you saw here. These were telephone conversations, and so so we didn't ask those on the phone. But you know what? It raises a really excellent point about how to go further with this. You know, much more rigorous sorts of things guided by hints provided by this might sample people and give them a smartphone for a month and get their permission just to look at their clicks and that sort of thing. That would be a more rigorous way to do it. It would also cost twice what this did, but I'd be happy to do that. That'd be great. Larry.
Can you talk about how you corrected for the fact that many young people do not talk on the phone at all, and how you guaranteed that there was a representative sample?
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, this uses both landline and cell phones. The sample was drawn from 2/3 cell phones and 1/3 landlines, which roughly matches portion of ownership in Montana among adults. And then secondly, as Eric asked, the data are then weighted to U.S. Census Bureau population totals for age, for sex, and then location within the state.
John?
Yes?
Question on the reasons people share news on the internet. What's your sense of people answering importance and relevance, maybe because they don't want to admit they're sharing stuff that isn't important and relevant?
Yeah, you know, that's true. If you remember, we did get people who said because it's funny. But when you ask an open-ended question, all humans come up with a response initially, and then they edit that response based on the situation and the person they're speaking with before they actually say it. That's kind of there's a whole big literature about that in survey research. So I would say, yeah, that's probably the case. The thing is that it's tough to get at without being able to look inside their mind. So when you're talking with a human or interviewing them or doing any sort of information gathering from them, unless you can observe their behavior without talking to them, then that's kind of tough to get at. But yeah, you bet. I think you're right.
John, let's take one more question if we have one, and then we're going to take a short break. Everybody is welcome to grab a sandwich. We're going to come back and have a more informal conversation about these, and you can certainly ask other questions. But does anybody have a question? No, go.
I'm just wondering if you asked them specifically what social platforms they might use, whether it was Facebook or Twitter.
No. We let them, we didn't differentiate between the two. this time. In June of 2015, we did ask a question specifically about the platform of social media that they use, and if you want, I can get you that result.
Okay, John, thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation. And again, let me just invite everybody to take a short break. We're going to reconvene right here in this room. We're going to talk about the things that John already presented, and if you have other ideas, questions, we are open to all kinds of comments and suggestions, and we want to get your take on some of what you've heard as well. Thank you.
And lunch will be coming in literally momentarily. We'll put it up there and some drinks. And then you'll need to take the chairs with you if you would, please. And we're going to try and sit on both sides of the table. We may have to move it back a little. So glad to see so many of you here. And we just got a couple more coming in. Hey.
You know, I was more scared than, yeah, leaving the meeting with an around, or in the dark, because I was kind of like another class.
Very interesting.
Right, oh, really? Well, you know, I was
And this is Julia.
That's why we came.
yeah, it's the most. Well, because they
They're always talking sell and systems.
Oh, I think you're right, especially this election.
The guy behind you right now, their perception is like,
I was talking about getting outstanding news sources.
oh, yeah,
What's happening right on the line, get from an accurate news source.
oh, that's all right. I'll talk about that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, but I mean, like, do you have a?
Yeah, just like that. Wow. Good. Nice to meet
I'm with the broadcast.
How are you? Fall and winter, sooner or later. Yeah. No, really.
I'm not munching yet. Just go ahead. So I
But we went there for Thanksgiving. So you've been keeping busy.
You just kind of gather up around here and just leave me alone. I shouldn't be I stand there talking. I love this stuff.
brother graduated high school. I moved up there.
Yeah, exactly. I'm guessing that, but
Oh, that's a great
Jim and I, we're gonna have to get together and have a big shake and oh, that's fine, let's go.
Is this the back of all of them?
So have they rolled out a marketing campaign to help drive revenue yet?
Yeah, we might just stick this for guys.
I gotta say hi to this person over here. Nice to see you. Boy, thanks for coming over. You missed the presentation? Yeah. Did you really? Hi, George.
It was a good meeting.
Hey, what's that?
And I love it, as Jim said,
Yeah.
Really? With whom? Cool. Let us know what we can do to help. Yeah.
We've got a big audience, but we wanted some of those smaller
Yeah, right.
newspapers.
Good.
It was a perfect fit.
Wow, that's really cool.
oh, okay.
Huh?
Oh, I was gonna say, are these off the insurance? How long have you been insured? That's why I don't recognize the name.
We actually ours would be very late for that we have.
Absolutely.
Nice save.
They, nobody's gonna say all this.
Oh, wonderful, so glad you
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
someone just suggested that. I think it's a great Yeah, I'm gonna pick you as I go by.
Oh yeah, there's plenty.
Here, can I get that for you?
Well, everybody, thank you for joining us for our discussion. And we've got a few more chairs, and we can bring in a few more if we need them here. But I want to ask each of you, if you wouldn't mind, to take this microphone as we pass it around and give us your name and affiliation, and then we'll start our discussion. But let's see who we have with us here.
Sure. I'm Nate Kavanaugh. I'm with the Montana Chamber of Commerce.
Patrick Webb with Senator Steve Daines' office.
Larry Abramson, Dean of the Journalism School at UM.
Greater Montana Foundation and also Star Radio out of Great Falls.
Sydney Armstrong, Executive Director and Trustee for the Greater Montana Foundation. I also want to add, we have more copies now of the slides and of the news release and fact sheet. So I'll put them out on the table. Thank you.
I'm Judy Rolfe, and I'm here from the office of Congressman Dinky in the Helena District.
Webb Brown, Montana Chamber of Commerce.
Fred Flanders, Greater Montana Foundation.
Leo Berry, Greater Montana Foundation.
Craig Neft, KCAB Radio.
Jim Rickman, Montana Newspaper Association.
Dewey Bruce, Montana. Great, they give the broadcaster a mic that doesn't work. Dewey Bruce, Montana Broadcasters Association.
Kevin Scalore, Montana Radio Company.
Laura Parvey-Connors, I'm with the Montana State Auditor's Office.
I'm Eric Whitney. I'm the news director at Montana Public Radio.
I'm Brett Hamilton, Mayor of Phillipsburg and Vice President of Quantum IT Company.
Julian Ritchie, what I do? Right? It's going on and off.
Holly, Quantum IT.
I'm John Baldridge.
Troy Bellinger, Star Radio News Director, Great Falls.
Sarah Lawler, I'm the PR Director at Carroll.
Margot Entz, I'm in web and social media for Carroll College.
Brian Werber with marketing for St. Peter's Hospital.
Curtis Hobbs with Independent Record.
And I'm Erica Yakwich, the Regional Digital Director for the Independent Record and Montana Standard.
Bruce Wittenberg, Director of the Montana Historical Society. Welcome, everyone.
Did we get everybody? Well, I'm, again, Whitsitt, Chairman of the Greater Montana Foundation, and let me just make one announcement for all of the journalism people and the university people who are here. Just a reminder that this summer we did approve educational assistance grants for working journalists to take individual courses at any accredited college or university to help in their reporting on jobs, business, and the economy. So anybody here might be interested, just ask Sid for more information or talk to me. We're happy to make it available. And speaking of education, I'd like to start our discussion today, or ask actually Larry Abramson to start our discussion. Larry, of course, is Dean of the Journalism School at the University of Montana, and his students are the ones who are going to be dealing increasingly with this new technology age. And I'd like for Larry maybe to make a few comments about what you saw today and how the school is adapting to new forms of communication. Larry, would you do that for us?
Sure.
Hi, thanks, everybody, and welcome, and enjoy your sandwiches. So, I took a slightly different view of some of the results that John presented, and I think one of the most interesting things for me, since I'm originally an East Coaster, is sort of to compare Montana to the rest of the country and to try to figure out areas where Montana is having a different experience. And I think that some of the questions that I was asking and Eric were asking about generational differences would be interesting to tease out of this particular survey. I know that you had statistics showing, a certain percentage of people who were got all of their news through social media, and I'm going to speculate that all of those people are my students, basically, because none of them are reading newspapers, and I assume that everybody who is getting all of their news from newspapers are from an older demographic, and I think that that's something that we are extremely aware of at the journalism school, that our students are having a completely different experience of the news because of social media. And this has been going on for years, to be honest. I mean, it's not a new phenomenon. I really admire you guys for trying to understand this. It's very hard to measure. I couldn't imagine getting one of these surveys or even responding to it, because I don't know the answers to some of the questions myself that you are asking. And I think more and more of our students, which we were actually talking about this in my class yesterday, are receiving so many feeds. You mentioned Facebook and Twitter, but that's really just a very small portion of the fire hose of information that they're getting, that they don't remember where they're getting their stuff from and what they're forwarding on to like-minded friends and everything. It's becoming such the dominant reality rather than a discrete part of their day. I heard another statistic on NPR the other day, which I'm sure is 100% reliable given the source, that the average adult is spending 9 hours a day occupied with screens. And the story was about it's good for our children. I think, forgetting about the kid, this tells you a lot about the fact that this is what our waking life is about right now. So to answer Bill's question, we work under the assumption that our students are experiencing the world through social media. That is the rule, not the exception. But they are writing for a population that is having a different experience than they are. And in contrast to my generation, that is the biggest challenge for them, is to try to keep many different populations in mind who are having an experience. I think it's interesting. I know that there are still some people out there who don't use the internet. My mother is one of them. She never has. But it's a very, very small population, and I'm sure those people will be won't be a measurable part of the population in the coming years. So this is definitely reality.
Larry, can I just comment on one of the points that you made, and also maybe clarify for people something in this age of technology we having some problems. I'll speak loudly, and if the mic works. First of all, remember, and the reason John showed the 2015 survey, and we also did a little bit of a retest on where people get their news, we should remember very clearly that this survey dug into only one area of where people get their news. That's among them saying that they more people get most of their news from television than internet, than radio and newspapers. And so really what we're seeing, I think, and John, you correct me if you think that I'm misstating this, but we're seeing that Montanans get their news from lots of sources. What we didn't measure is how much of the news any group of people necessarily gets just from the internet or just from television or just from radio. That really more goes to the survey we did last year. And so I think we're finding that Montanans are using a wide range of sources. And Larry, in the big data set that you'll see, there are some very interesting slides that I'd recommend to everybody on the age questions, because you see some marked differences, as you discussed, with the use of the internet and social media by age categories, and also there are gender differences in terms of use of social media and some of the internet news sources and others. So the survey is made and the data sets are made so that those who might need this for whether it's advertising, government, or whatever, can dig as deeply as they want and come up with more of that kind of information. Let me ask now, maybe to comment a little bit from a broadcaster's perspective. Dewey is the president of the Montana Broadcasters Association. Dewey, how are things changing in your world?
Well, by quite a bit. Thank you, Bill. I think this is a great survey. The 2015 was a really good survey for my members to take a look at. We're becoming more and more involved all the time with the internet. It's driving from our viewers and listeners to our websites for news, for information, at their convenience. It's not anymore where they have to go to see the news at 6 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock in the morning, although they still do. They also want to take a little bit more in depth in what's going on with a certain news story and that sort of thing. With our members, it varies as far as how much involved they are with the internet, but for the most part, they're very involved. So I think if you take a look at, I would like to get, I'm glad you did geographically too within the state of Montana. I would like to take a closer look and see what's going on in the rural areas of Montana, where news is, for local news, is not quite as available on what's going on locally as it used to be, and only really through radio on a daily basis. And that's something that I'm interested in taking a look at and seeing where they're getting their information as far as for local news. The other concern that I have is the so-called fake news that's going on out there, and have we done anything? Is there a way that we can look at that and see how they look at their sources? You know, reporters look at their sources and who the source is. The consumer of the news, are they looking at their sources, the source that they're getting from? I was just talking with our friends from Phillipsburg there, and he was asking about that himself. And so, by the way, that's a great place to live, Phillipsburg. But that's kind of what I'm interested in. And I'm really happy that the Greater Montana Foundation is doing these things that we can take a look at and see how people are consuming news, where they're consuming it, that sort of thing. So,
thanks, Dewey. Let's pause right here. Anybody have a question on the comments that were just made before I ask my friend Jim Rickman to talk about some of the newspaper trends?
Yeah. You hit it right on the rural areas are, I think, wide open right now for all of us. We're seeing a lot of this, especially in Phillipsburg, where we have the ranch at Rock Creek, which is the highest paid motel room in the United States. It's having a big effect on our economy, and having 219 to 23 running around, and I think that's a big thing with rural areas. How are you getting your, and like you say, really radio is the only source right now of daily news.
And I noticed they're all using their smartphones.
And let me ask Jim Rickman to jump in, because our 2015 survey did find that there is a strong local or community newspaper sector too. People do read weeklies and some of those smaller publications, I think, right, Jim?
Yes, I'm going to pass on. First of all,
we're going to ask you to at least use one.
First of all, I'd like to thank Bill, Sidney, and the Board of Directors of the Greater Montana Foundation for this really significant investment that was made in research. As I mentioned, after the last study, this sort of research has kind of fallen by the wayside in the media industry, and this sort of research is invaluable as our enterprises are developing long-term strategies. So, thank you very much. So, a few takeaways. First one is local news still rules for our local enterprises, and the more we continue to focus on good, local, relevant news, whether they're in our broadcast or whether they're in our newspapers or websites, that is what is going to retain and maintain strong franchises here in the state of Montana. I guess another takeaway also is there, at least on the newspaper side, have been skeptics as to whether their future involves digital. And I think that I'm really looking forward to taking this research to our members, and especially some of the members that have had doubts in the past, because I think this is going to be very, very beneficial to them. I think it's also going to be extremely beneficial in reinforcing the strong digital strategy some of our members have had. And this is a different way of kind of quantifying their work other than the traditional page views and clicks and whatnot. From an audience perspective, I was somewhat intrigued by the phenomenon of shared news, and especially when it comes to advertising is based on audience is based on individuals. I don't think that we're probably doing a very good job of capturing what a shared news user is, or what a shared user is, and I think that's going to be an important message that we take to our advertisers and also work on. So with this whole digital social media smartphone phenomena and how it's growing so rapidly, you know, the one thing that we still need to work on as operators is how to generate revenue from this audience. That still continues to be a major struggle for us, and hopefully this type of research will help in that very important part of the equation, which is how do we produce revenue to support good journalism.
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to ask Jim Senst, who is deeply involved in the business of media and creating business models, to maybe comment on that very point that Jim brought up from the newspaper perspective. What about the business models of the future, Jim?
Well, that's a nice segue, too, because for, looking back 10 years, what the internet, what impact that had on our business wasn't as substantial, or 20 years ago. But today it is huge. And it also has a huge impact on our small, local, Main Street retailers, who are the bread and butter for advertising in our community. And it's 0 degrees out, and they're shopping online. And so we face some of the same challenges that Jim was talking about. The majority of my on-air announcers have been in radio for 25, 30 years plus. So on one hand, I'm very blessed that I have these very experienced broadcasters, but now when we're trying to shift to what are we going to look like today, 5 years and 10 years from now, Troy, for example, and my news director, is he going to be 60% over there on-air broadcasting and 40% posting stories, news, and information on our websites? And we had this discussion driving up here because we're kind of wondering what our studios are even going to look like 10 years from now. Will we even have towers and transmission equipment? I don't know. There's a lot of questions going forward. But it's getting tougher and tougher all the time to maintain a business model that is fair and equitable for our advertisers and gives them a bang for their dollars. So a lot of questions that we're really exploring, and how do we take our staff and put them in the proper slots going forward. Because monetizing your digital efforts, we know we got to do it. We have to be there. And on one hand, if Troy releases a news story and that's picked up and forwarded, and forwarded 10,000 times, I got 10,000 newscasters on the street. And everyone loves to be the first with a story. So there's some advantages to it, but challenges too, Bill.
Thanks, Jim. Anybody have a comment or question before I ask Larry Abramson another question that has occurred to me? Sure. Hold on.
I was curious how these metrics here actually stack up against national trends.
And I'm going to stand right next to John here to jump in.
Okay. I'm going to give you sort of two answers. I'll give you a couple of percentages to compare to the nation, and then a second type of answer, which is even Pew and other areas haven't looked at this level of detail at a state level or a local level or even a national level. So a lot of the stuff that's in here doesn't have something that it can be compared to. So there are some basic statistics that you can compare Montana to. One is the number of households that subscribe to an internet service in their household, the proportion. And we found in 2015 and again in 2016 that Montana is right on the national average for that. Next, with regard to smartphone use, we're just looking at those numbers, comparing smartphone use in Montana relative to smartphone use elsewhere. And I'll hand this over to Bill in just a second, but we're getting some hints that we might even we're not badly below national averages. We may either be on or slightly above. And I wanted to give you a little bit of anecdotal intuition about why that might be true. There is some indication around not only around the United States, but internationally, that people with lower incomes will purchase communication, that is a phone or even a smartphone, at the expense of some other vital thing. And so lots of folks get internet access who don't have a subscription in their home, have a pay-as-you-go smartphone. And that's how they get to the internet. And so we're starting to see that might be the case in Montana, that people really think it's important to be able to get access to the internet. And so we might even be a little above the national average in smartphone use, but I don't want to stick my neck out there yet because I haven't looked at it close enough.
I would just add a couple things. There have been several fairly recent surveys, Gallup and Pew, that have touched on usage of technology, and I think John has summed that up beautifully. There also have been a couple of national surveys that have talked about particularly how millennials get their news. And I know Larry is familiar with a lot of this research. And that's where we get the concept of bumping into news. That among millennials, Gallup, I believe it was, found that it's most prevalent, as you would expect, because millennials are on the go and on their cell phones and using information technology differently and are more likely to bump into news even though they're doing other business on their smartphones. And so we've seen some of that, the unintentional versus the intentional, and there's more data in the big slide deck that we encourage people to pull down. And then the question I wanted to ask Larry goes to some things that have come out in some recent surveys about news media credibility, and where you have the intersection of social media and sharing of news, if there's an echo chamber effect. Larry, what are the implications for more traditional journalists, journalism organizations, and schools like yours where you teach ethics and people are supposed to not do fake news and all of that? How does this play out in your discussions with students about responsibility for accuracy and responsibility on the part of citizens that we saw, I think, reflected in our survey, to be a bit skeptical about things that don't come from really trusted sources?
We had a forum about this very subject. It was close to the election, just about the role that fake news played and the role that journalists played in perhaps not covering what they should have been covering. And my students are very interested in this right now. I'm trying to sort of go slowly in that I'm reluctant to assign them to a lifetime of correcting fake news. I've been reading a lot of fake news lately, and let me just tell you, it will give you heartburn, both to consider what is out there and also to consider what people are believing. The Comet news story from my old neighborhood in Washington, D.C., I used to eat at the Comet, and I can tell you that there's no child abuse going on there. But you know, the notion of the news media taking on the idea of correcting all wrong notions that are out there among the population is disturbing to me as a journalist. I'm disturbed at what that may do to enterprise reporting. We have bigger tasks at hand than correcting mistaken notions. I don't want to be too flippant about it, but there are people out there who still believe the Earth is flat and that the sun revolves around the Earth. It doesn't, I think. Okay. That we need to keep the eye on the ball, and we do need to pick our own editorial subjects. But I think at the same time, what mobile media and increasing consumption of news online gives us is a greater opportunity to engage with our audience. And I think that's another assignment for your next survey, is sort of to look at the role of news consumers in actually participating in news, because that really is the revolutionary thing that's going on here, is that they can contribute to the news product, they can contribute to the success of the news product, that our audience now is an active participant. And I think all of the media professionals in this room are painfully aware of the fact that they don't get to call the shots entirely. So I'm hoping the next time we do a survey, and I'm hoping that more and more of my students will look into this. We are actually going to start a new sequence next year at the J School that will look at social media and audience cultivation, the creation of an audience as a positive thing. That's something that isn't simply a marketing tool, but is a creation of a kind of community that still brings some perils with it. So.
And I'm going to ask Webb Brown to make a comment. I saw him about to jump out of his chair a minute ago. Webb is the president of the Montana Chamber of Commerce.
Well, it really is a question, and it arose from some of the surveys, so maybe John has that as well. In talking about the credibility of the news sources, I noticed that over 25%, more than one of every four, didn't know which of the three were the most credible sources. Now, does that mean they don't think any of them are credible? I was wondering if there was a follow-up question saying, do you think they're credible or not? Or the converse, maybe the least credible, but again, if it were equal. My point is, are we losing the confidence and the credibility of the traditional news sources overall, and kind of going down this route of the fake news that if I agree with it, then it has to be true. And if I disagree with it, then obviously it's wrong. So I don't know if there's an answer to that.
Let's let John comment. I have with me actually the latest Gallup survey that does show that the overall credibility of the mass media is at an all-time low, in their words. So,
the thing that the survey researcher's caveat that I would give you, it's kind of like an economist caveat. You work with my boss, so you know what's coming. That we did this survey during an election season in which our respondents were really sensitive. And anecdotally, my interviewers, they're in a relationship with that respondent on the phone, and they got the feeling that asking a number of credibility questions made people more uncomfortable than anything else. Now, you can draw whatever conclusion you want from that, but the bottom line is that we got more don't knows and question avoidance on the credibility question. And that in and of itself is an interesting finding because going into it, one would not think that was all that sensitive, but we were getting almost income question level ducking, and that, the income question is the most sensitive question on a typical survey. Unless you're asking about, HIV, intravenous drug use, or criminal behavior and that sort of thing. So there.
Thanks, John. I would just sort of reinforce what John said. When you go to the decks and look at the numbers on those credibility questions, you'll notice John highlighted there was one with 51, one with 100 and some. I would take those with a huge salt shaker full of salt. And I would look more at some of the rankings of use rather than necessarily the credibility numbers where you have those low numbers. Is that a fair caution? Okay. Okay, let's open this up, and I'd love to get some feedback from everybody else or anybody else as to any takeaways, any areas that you think we ought to look more carefully at in the future. Any comments that people have? Let me take this microphone over here. By the way, even if it cuts out in the room, I'm hoping that on the recording we'll have good sound, so that's why the mic.
I had a question about the data. Not sure if you guys were able to look at this or not, but and by the way, thank you so much. Very fascinating. I'm going to be taking this information and sending it with, sharing it with our entire staff, with Senator Daines. And so I had a quick question. When you were looking at people who get their news from social media, was there any study to see if there was a large number of people that get their news from individuals, like societal leaders, talk show hosts, group, like different people like that? Because I guess getting down to it, I was curious to see if there's a large number of people that do get their news from, senators, congressmen, people like that, or if they're just looking for the news sites mostly.
Carry this over to John to ask about this particular study. I will say that in work that I've done in communications research, in the political sphere and government, there are some very good outfits, including Public Opinion Strategies that we partnered with on the 2015 study, along with BDPR, that do panels, and they ask those questions very deeply. But, John, what about this survey?
The answer is we didn't ask. We did get some answers in some of the open-ended questions that were in the quantities that they didn't make these slides of Well, for instance, the state of Montana government's website was mentioned. I'm a University of Montana guy, so for sports, UM's Grizz website was mentioned. But no, it's an open field, and really don't have much information for you on that. I'm sorry.
Other comments or questions? Yeah.
I actually mentioned it previously, but the actual frequency of use might be a pretty good data layer to actually put on these results here, just to understand where the people truly are getting it on a regular basis. And you had said about tracking cell phone usage or something, but every media company now is actually pulling analytics in the moment out to the annual. And if you do have good ombudsmen that can actually get those metrics for you, that might be a pretty good place to start.
Good comment. Bruce?
Well, I'm curious about kind of the convergence of all media. I'm kind of young and hip, so. But as an example, I get up in the morning, turn on Montana PBS, read the Independent Record, then check the Billings Gazette website, Facebook. How many people are using a whole variety of media during the course of the day to keep up with what's going on? Read the paper in the morning and then check throughout the day for up. I see in the media push more in that direction to get you to go to the website, get you to go to the Facebook page and all that stuff. So.
Maybe I can answer for John. We've talked about this, and again, it was kind of to the point that I made earlier, that in our surveys, in both the surveys that we've done, it does appear that Montanans are using that whole swath, or many Montanans, and we can't tell which groups really or which individuals use mainly one or only one, but the returns on all these sources are so high that it looks like comments from the media folks, too, that we're seeing business models evolve to where, as I've said before when asked about these things, that television reporters now need to be able to write well for the website. Newspaper reporters need to be able to shoot video. It's to me, we're seeing this integration at that end, too, both at the provider and the consumer. I think. Anybody disagree with that or have another comment on that? Any other comments or thoughts that anybody wants to offer here? Here we go.
Thank you. One of the questions I have is Montana is becoming very mobile. Like for myself, I retired and I moved from Havre, Montana to Phillipsburg. I definitely changed how I got the news. The Havre Daily, KRTV, whatever. And there is a difference when you live in a bigger city versus a small town on what you use to get your news. Is there anything in the survey that reflects that?
Yeah, we did. We compared residents of the big 7 counties to the rest of the counties. So we did an urban-rural comparison. There are a few differences. But remember, we were looking at how people get internet news on this one. And so in terms of how people get internet news, that internet medium is a little bit of a leveler. So there's not nearly as many urban-rural differences as you might think because they're already accessing the internet. So once they're on that internet, their sources are wide open. And so that was the purpose of this particular one. We did find more differences in 2015 in terms of radio use, newspaper, and traditional television in that regard. And so I could probably talk to you afterwards a little bit and maybe get you some of the results of the 2015 one also.
I'm just, I think usually these kinds of surveys are most valuable when there's a follow-up and you can do some evaluation over time, or whether or not there's a market change toward one channel or another one. John, I don't know if you talked about whether you can do that. The reason it's interesting that almost everybody is online right now is because 20 years ago they weren't, and we were very worried about places like Montana being cut out, and that hasn't happened. I mean, really, most of the state is online. I think the challenge with doing another survey next year and the year after is that the language of online usage is changing so rapidly, and your questions about Twitter and Facebook are already starting to be a little bit outdated. You don't have a Snapchat, you don't have Instagram, some of the channels that are really ascendant right now. And there may not be a Twitter next year. It's entirely possible just because of financial reasons. But I would think that would be the most interesting things would be for us to be back here, in a year, and I'm sure Bill will pay for that, the sandwiches for that, and in 5 years to see, what kind of evolution the state goes through, and but maybe you can comment on just the challenge of keeping the terms straight so you can do a comparison, and I'll walk it over to you because Bill's getting tired.
Really, my perspective on this survey is that in 10 years this is going to look really naive and elementary and rudimentary. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't worth doing. There's a lot of information that we have now that we didn't have before we did the survey. Having said that, this survey raises way more questions than it answers. I would love to have the money to do some qualitative research to ask people how they think about these things, to probe in depth about how they think about these things, so that then we can quantify them. So that we're using the right language, so that we're testing the right mechanisms. Secondly, survey research may not be the best venue in having sometimes it is, but maybe sampling people, giving them smartphones and letting us look at their clicks, and asking them some questions during and after the process. Because people's behavior may reveal more than having a conversation with them. So, but the good news is this survey has raised a bunch of those questions. And I'm in the business of gathering this sort of information, so it sounds like an advertisement for, to pay for that. But maybe focus groups? That's entirely correct. Some qualitative stuff, some focus groups, that sort of thing, so that we really need to know more about how people think about these things, and also about their behaviors to ask questions. And even then, in terms of survey research, if we've got the time and money, we may want to move off the phone and go to address-based and that kind of thing, because the viability of telephone survey research as a sampling mechanism is eroding for all the reasons you guys already know.
I'm really sorry that subject came up, because this morning John and I at breakfast talked about focus groups and follow-on projects. I didn't want it to come up here because both our executive director and treasurer are here, and I didn't want any heart attacks in this. But anyway, I think it's a great area for us to think about. Other comments and questions? Okay, let me.
Mine is kind of a combination of a question and a comment. Being in the newspaper market, for traditional providers that are in this room, how much of our collective credibility has been lost just from the really, I think, dangerous narrative that's out there? From people who think that media is dying. They're not making the distinction between traditional media and journalism. I don't know where it fell through the cracks, where we collectively aren't doing a good job of making that distinction. I have the benefit of talking to people, whether they're sources or advertisers, whatever it might be, and they're not making that distinction. If everybody decided to go out and cut the cord tomorrow, would news evaporate? No, they would still have journalism to go to online. The media is just shifting. So I think that there's a really dangerous narrative that we're kind of perpetuating ourselves. I was just wondering if there's anybody else who thinks that that's also the case, or if you've heard of anybody having that same feeling.
I disagree with that.
Here, let me pass you the mic. 1 second.
I think it's, my concern about I agree with what you say about people not differentiating between different news sources, and this goes back to what Larry said about people getting so many different feeds. If you hop on Facebook and you see people sharing all kinds of things, and some are from familiar traditional media sources, and some are from, it looks like a news article, it's from an outlet you've never heard of before, may or may not be true. But as those proliferate, and as more and more of them are proven to be fake, then it brings the level of traditional fact-check media down. So if you see 1,000 news stories a day, and you don't believe most of them are credible, then one that comes from one of our sources that we, why would, here's the last 3 articles I read sounded like BS to me, so here's one from X newspaper. Well, why should I believe that either? So, I think all we can do as journalists is keep doing our job and keep providing non-fake news, and hope that the audience is going to differentiate and will rise to other sources that people become familiar with. They'll recognize those as fake, and they'll come to us because, that may be overly optimistic. I'd really like to think that we've hit the bottom in terms of people's skepticism of the media, of traditional media, and it's going to bounce back. I keep waiting for that to happen. I haven't seen evidence that it's happening yet, but those are my thoughts.
One of the dominant results from this survey is that traditional media are still the dominant sources of news for adults in Montana. Both in the 2015, if you take the 2015 and the 2016 combined, that's inescapable. And even given all of the vagaries of survey research, that's inescapable in Montana. So that's something maybe you can tell people, remind people that, those traditional sources are dominant sources right now. Others are creeping in, yeah. But even on this one, on the looking at internet news, which is where they creep in mostly, we didn't see very much. A little bit. It didn't make, most of them didn't make, there were a few up there that sort of that might have some fake news occasionally that did creep, make our slides, but not very many. And not very large proportions of the population.
Just one comment in regards to your question. I'm starting to see my 30-something friends want to pay for a subscription to a print newspaper again. Like they actually had turned away from it and only wanted to get their news online, and they're starting to realize that Google is dictating what news they're receiving off of their searches, and that they're starting to see that there is an echo chamber in the stuff that they're seeing. And so I've seen recently, even on social media, about 5 of my friends that are like, I'm starting to subscribe to the printed Billings Gazette again or the Helena Independent Record. Also because when you go to their news site, they're showing on the homepage what the most viewed articles are versus the latest news, which is frustrating for me too. I'm like, I don't want to see what everybody else is reading. I want to get the whole picture. And so my hope is there's going to be a resurgence of print again, and people are going to want to physically look at the paper again instead of looking at a screen so they can see the whole story.
Let me just insert one thing here, too. Columbia Journalism Review, this was yesterday's publication. Print is dead. Long live print. Goes right to your point.
So my family comes from newspaper owners. They've had newspapers in Montana since like early 1900s. So this is very close to me. And as a young person, I'm constantly trying to figure out how do we reach my demographic? How do we adapt? But how do we bring them in? So I've been trying to go back and forth. And do we train them to read media that's credible while also adapting to how we do things? I mean, I've been trying to think about it, and I don't know what the solution is, but I think it's a combination of we just don't know. I mean, I get a subscription to the Tribune because that's what I grew up with, and I love it. And everybody gets it. So in print, and that's just because I like it. But I'm just constantly trying to figure it out, and I don't know what the answer is. But I think we need to be trained a little bit. I mean, we need to be told a little bit what to do, but media also needs to respond to what we like and what we need and how we read, because it's not more than 140 characters.
Boy, we're hearing some good comments. I love this. Any other thoughts? We've got just a couple of minutes, so we've got time for another thought or two. Anybody? One here.
I just had, and I might have missed this at the beginning when we were talking about when you were setting up the survey, John, about, for me it's always been, and this may, I don't know if this is an age thing or not, but seemingly the big question to me is how many people, pay attention to the news, period. So when you're going through that initially, okay, you pass along news stories, you don't pass along news stories, you're on the internet. How many people on the internet, I think the big thing was tripped over the news. That is to say, I got my news because it was just kind of thrown in my face. And I guess if there's some place to go with that, I think part of it is, I've always kind of been of the opinion half the people in the country are looking at news in some manner of form, and the other half really is not. And so, do you get any gleaning out of that, of the people, if there's any kind of age thing or not, of the people that actually pay attention to news of any kind? And that's the number I'm kind of interested in, the tripped over number.
You already you saw that number, and it's in your packet. There was a slide that hit the cutting room floor that we asked in one of the introductory questions of a representative sample of Montana adults, asking them how much they pay attention to the news these days. It's kind of a common conversational question. To start a survey, it's sort of interesting. It's not threatening. I don't have that's in our larger slide deck that you can see. I don't have the percentages memorized, but my memory is that the proportion was pretty high. And if I was going to talk about that slide, I would have compared it with the national stuff. But I also would have given the caveat that we asked that question in election season. And I think there is a seasonality to that question as well. And this particular survey, because of when it was done, is going to be impacted by that seasonality. And you need to remember that.
I think I'm going to have to draw everything to a close here. I want to thank all of you for coming, for engaging in this discussion. We will have the large deck up on the website in the next couple of days. In the meantime, or after that, if you have other questions, I'm sure John is available at the university. Certainly Sid Armstrong can field or direct questions to any of us, and any of us as trustees of the Greater Montana Foundation would like to hear your questions and your ideas and any comments about the work we're doing or the work you think we could be doing. And again, thank you very much for being with us today.
Selling books, they're signing books. This is an unpaid, non-political announcement. I don't want you to miss it. Thanks very much.